What would it be like if the Soviet Union could be reconstructed? Would it have the same power it did in the Cold War? Putin sure seems to think so. He once said that the fall of the Soviet Union was the disintegration of historical Russia. The Soviet Union's collapse instead turned the current Russian Federation into what Putin calls a completely different country, and what had been built up over 1,000 years was largely lost. He further laments it as a humanitarian tragedy, that the countries formerly part of the Soviet Union are now cut off from Russia. Putin made these remarks in November 2021, and they are an important revelation into his expansionist ambitions. But why exactly is Putin so convinced that reuniting the Soviet Union would restore Russia's former power? Let's start with the facts. There is little question that the fall of the Soviet Union harmed Russia's geopolitical position. What was once a single country broke up into 15 independent successor states, with the Russian Federation being the most prominent and the one that took on the Soviet Union's international position and responsibilities, such as its nuclear arsenal and permanent seat on the United Nations Security Council. However, the Soviet Union's breakup forced Russia to retreat from many of the boundaries it had established for hundreds of years prior to the communist haven's existence. The Soviet Union and its predecessor, the Russian Empire, was once a formidable player in the Baltic. That position had almost entirely eroded, with Russia maintaining only a small presence on the Baltic coastline centered on Kaliningrad, which is not connected with the Russian mainland, and the city of St. Petersburg, which Peter the Great founded during the Great Northern War with Sweden in the early 18th century. Since its victory over the Swedes, Russia steadily gained more control of the Baltic coastline, but the fall of the Soviet Union reversed all of that. As a result, Russia's power in the Baltic is contained. Meanwhile, the sea has practically become a NATO lake, with Finland's recent membership and Sweden's membership in the alliance pending. If the Soviet Union were to be reconstituted, Russia's presence in the Baltic would greatly expand, and NATO's frontiers would retreat hundreds of miles further west, putting Russia in a much better position to buffer its territorial homeland and contest NATO's dominance in the waters. Further south, the entirety of Belarus and Ukraine was part of the Soviet Union. This territorial extent allowed the Soviet Union far greater power projection into the European plane than its successor state enjoys today. It also had a much bigger buffer to protect the so-called Volgograd Gap, the narrow piece of land that connects the Russian heartland through the Caucasus to its southern border. This piece of land is vital for Russia's geopolitical position. If Russia were to lose control of it, it would also effectively lose control of the Caucasus, the Caspian Sea, and its remaining presence in the Black Sea. Crimea would be unable to be resupplied by land. It's no surprise that the Volgograd Gap became an object of some of the fiercest contention in both world wars and was a primary objective for the German invasion of Russia on both occasions. Prior to the demise of the Soviet Union, there was a much narrower border, much further west of the Volgograd Gap than the one that exists today. The fall of the Soviet Union means that Russia has a much longer border to defend on the essentially indefensible terrain of the European plain, and the border is much closer to the Volgograd Gap than the one that existed in 1991, giving NATO far more leverage in its strategic position. If the Soviet Union's borders were to be reconstructed, NATO would be forced onto a narrower front, one much further to the west of the Volgograd Gap. Russia, or whatever the new state was to be called, would have much better options to pursue its foreign policy. It's no surprise that Putin questioned the existence of a historical Ukraine and was eager to announce a formal annexation of the occupied Ukrainian territories in the fall of 2022. Even as Russia's military was being pushed back on all fronts at the time, the more Ukrainian territory that Russia can occupy, the further to the west it pushes its supposed border away from the Volgograd Gap, and the easier it is to defend. If Russia were to succeed in restoring the Soviet Union's borders, it would be able to concentrate on a narrower front, stretching from the Polish border in the north to the Black Sea in the south, where the western borders of Ukraine and Moldova are today. NATO's options would be more constrained, and from the Russian perspective, the Volgograd Gap would be much better protected from the types of invasions seen in World Wars I and II that still give Moscow shivers. Restoring the Soviet Union's borders would also mean the vast increase in Russian influence in Western and Central Asia. The modern states of Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Azerbaijan, Armenia, Georgia, and Tajikistan were all once part of the Soviet Union. The new country, whatever it would be called, would then almost entirely circle the Caspian Sea. The borders in Asia would come up to Turkey, Iran, Afghanistan, and Pakistan, while the border with China would be a lot longer than Russia's border with the People's Republic today. Controlling that amount of territory on the Eurasian landmass would give Russia more of a say in how resources there are managed. Central Asia hosts many valuable natural resources like coal, oil, natural gas, and metals like copper, and the rare earth elements that are at the heart of the modern digital economy. This region was also at the center of the old Silk Road trading network. Because of its position as a bridge between East and West, it is a region China has ambitions for with its Belt and Road infrastructure project, which is meant to more greatly connect China with Europe. Even though the Soviet Union is no more, Russia has always considered itself the leading figure in Central Asian politics and still does today. Although Russia and China have had better relations in recent years than in any recent historical memory, the latter's increasing encroachment into Central Asia remains a point of contention in Moscow. If the Soviet Union were to be restored, Moscow would have much greater leverage in its relations with Beijing, which the invasion of Ukraine revealed is undoubtedly the senior player in their strategic partnership. It would also have much greater leverage in its dealings with Iran, which has supplied it with many of the drones it has used in its war in Ukraine. Restoration of the Soviet borders would make Russia a much more formidable force in the Middle East as a whole. It would open up far greater opportunities for power projection there. Restoring the Soviet Union would do more than fortify Russia's geopolitical position, though. It would assuage some of Russia's demographic and economic problems. In 2023, the Russian Federation had a population of 144.3 million people, equivalent to about 1.8% of the total world population, and ninth among the world's most populated countries. However, the Russian population peaked in 1993 at about 149 million. It's expected to decline to about 133 million by 2050, which would make it the world's 17th most populated country. If trends continue, Russia will have a population of about 112 million people by the end of the century. Putin revealed much about his strategic aims with his announced annexation of the occupied territories of Ukraine, and it went beyond the addition of valuable geopolitical territory. The Russian policy was to give citizenship to the ethnically Russian population in the occupied Ukrainian areas, which, according to Moscow, bumped the country's 2023 population up to 146.5 million. This is still a drop in the bucket compared to the trend, however, and it will not stop the population decline. By restoring the Soviet Union's borders, though, the Russian Federation would restore the Soviet Union's population too, or at least as much of it as possible. Before its collapse in 1991, the Soviet Union had the world's third largest population. The 1989 census revealed a population of about 287 million people. The breakup of the Soviet Union split that population among many different successor states. Putin's annexation of Ukraine's eastern territories revealed his broader intentions. Restoring the Soviet borders is partly a method to reverse or at least arrest Russia's ongoing population decline. Ukraine's total population as of 2023 is close to 37 million. Taking over Ukrainian territory is partly a means to transferring its population to the authority of Moscow. Moldova has a population of 3.5 million. Russia has been involved in Moldovan politics by throwing its support to the pro-Russian breakaway Transnistria region. Russia also has about 1,500 troops in that area, and in the late summer of 2022, Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov warned Moldova that any attempt to endanger its soldiers there would provoke an attack. Lavrov also said that Russia would protect Russian-speaking people in Moldova, such as in the region of Gagauzia. This hints at Russia's greater ambitions to restore Moldova to the authority of Moscow. Belarus has a population of about 9.5 million in 2023. Unlike other post-Soviet states in Europe, it has never receded from the sphere of Russian influence, with Alexander Lukashenko, its dictator since 1994, being essentially a vassal of the Kremlin. Yet this arrangement may no longer be enough for Moscow. In early 2023, a document titled "Strategic Goals of the Russian Federation in Belarus" was leaked to the public. It suggested that the Kremlin was eyeing a full annexation of Belarus by 2030, done through the means of a permanent Russian military presence within its borders, carefully staged information control and media integration, and making Minsk economically dependent on Moscow. Belarus's incorporation would not only add to Russia's population, but bring its borders to Poland, putting that country in a more vulnerable geopolitical position. Russia has particularly resented the post-Soviet independence of the three Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. These three countries' accession to NATO in 2004 effectively cut Russia off from much of the Baltic Sea. Estonia has a population of about 1.3 million, Latvia about 1.8 million, and Lithuania about 2.7. Incorporation of the Baltic states back into the neo-Soviet empire would add about 5.8 million total people to the Russian population. There are 3 post-Soviet states in the Caucasus. The first is Georgia, with a population of around 3.7 million. Georgia was one of the first indicators of Russia's expansionist ambitions under Putin. In 2008, Russia intervened militarily in Georgia, recognizing the breakaway republics of South Ossetia, with a population of about 56,500 according to Russian sources, and Abkhazia, which occupies a strategically important coastline and has a population of about 245,000 according to the Russian sources. Russia's attempt to partition Georgia may be seen as a stepping stone to its desire for reintegration of the whole under its orbit. In the southern Caucasus is Azerbaijan, with a population of about 10.4 million. Azerbaijan and Russia share warm relations. Despite Putin's invasion of Ukraine, Russia brokered a ceasefire in the 2020 war with Armenia. As part of the terms, 1,600 armed Russian peacekeepers were deployed to the Nagorno-Karabakh line. These troops also control the only road linking that area to Armenia. Russia and Azerbaijan have pledged to enhance their economic relationship, especially in the energy sector. Azerbaijan also has a law that prevents Baku from receiving military or foreign aid from the United States unless it renounces the use of military force to resolve its disputes with Armenia, further deepening its ties with Moscow. The other post-Soviet state in the Caucasus, Armenia, has a population of about 2.8 million. It suffered a defeat in the war with Azerbaijan in 2020 and is currently trying to unwind some of its security agreements with Russia. For example, it refused to host military drills in the Collective Security Treaty Organization, CSTO, a post-Soviet military alliance. Azerbaijan is not a member of the CSTO, but the military alliance has not intervened on Armenia's behalf against Azerbaijan. It's becoming clear that the Kremlin is using Azerbaijan as a cat's paw for its policy in the Caucasus to force Armenia to go along with its wishes. In the longer term, Russian policy toward Azerbaijan may be to treat it like Belarus, as the FSB's assistance in putting down the unrest following the disputed presidential election of 2020 in that country forced the Belarusian regime further into dependency on Moscow. The Kremlin likely hopes that its intervention in Azerbaijan's disputes with Armenia will bring it closer to becoming a fully fledged satellite state. There are 5 post-Soviet states in Central Asia. The largest in territorial size but not in population is Kazakhstan, with about 19.6 million people. Kazakhstan reveals the demographic importance of this post-Soviet region, because unlike the former Soviet states to the west, including the still-growing Azerbaijan, it is expected to gain population between now and the end of the century. Demographers project that Kazakhstan will almost double in size to 34 million people by the end of the century. The same is true for Uzbekistan, the most populated country in the region with about 35 million people. In 2023, this makes it the most populated post-Soviet state after Russia itself and Ukraine. Demographers expect Uzbekistan to grow through the rest of the century, peaking at about 51 million people in the 2090s. Kyrgyzstan and Turkmenistan are much smaller, with populations of 6.7 and 6.5 million respectively, yet they are also expected to grow. Kyrgyzstan is expected to reach a population of 12 million by the end of the century, while Turkmenistan is expected to peak at about 9 million in the 2080s. Finally, there is Tajikistan, with a population of about 10.1 million. It too is expected to grow, doubling in size to 20.4 million by the end of the century. In the immediate term, Russia would significantly grow its population if it were to re-establish the old Soviet borders. It would increase in size to 294.5 million people, nearly doubling from Russia's current population. This would make it the world's 4th biggest country by population after India, China, and the United States. In the longer term, a restoration of the Soviet borders would mitigate to some extent the population decline in the Russian heartland. By adding areas expected to grow in population, Moscow would at least partially solve the issue of its population's declining birth rates. The Russian economy would also get a boost. Even before the war in Ukraine and the international sanctions it invited, Russia was far from being an economic powerhouse. Despite its ample resources and large population, the Russian economy was barely larger than Italy or Canada's, despite Russia having well over 2 times Italy's population and over 3.5 times Canada's. The Russian economy also shrank by 2% in 2022, thanks to international sanctions following the invasion of Ukraine. Russia is not an innovative or manufacturing powerhouse and does not enjoy internationally recognized products or brands. The most valuable part of its economy by far is its energy industry. The industry tends to range between 16 and 20% of Russia's GDP, with drop-offs in 2020 because of the COVID-19 pandemic and 2022 because of war sanctions. As of the first quarter of 2023, the Russian energy industry bounced back to a historical normal, 17.4% of GDP, thanks to trade with countries like China and India, which plugged some of the gap left by the sharp reduction of exports to the European Union. Restoring the Soviet Union would add the economic output and resources of the former Soviet countries to Russia's economy, which had a GDP of about $2.24 trillion in 2022, following the invasion, ranking it 8th in the world. Adding the totals from Belarus $72.79 billion, Estonia $38.10 billion, Latvia $41.15 billion, Lithuania $70.33 billion, Ukraine $161 billion, Moldova $14.42 billion, Georgia $24.61 billion, Armenia $19.5 billion, Azerbaijan $78.72 billion, Kazakhstan $221 billion, Uzbekistan $80.39 billion, Tajikistan $10.49 billion, Kyrgyzstan $10.93 billion, and Turkmenistan $45.6 billion, would increase the Russian economy to a total of about $3.048 trillion, putting it above France and almost on par with the United Kingdom's economy of $3.071 trillion in the world GDP rankings. Russia would be able to dictate more of the world's energy sector through its reserves and the reserves of the countries it absorbs into its orbit. Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, and Uzbekistan in particular have abundant oil and natural gas reserves. Kazakhstan has an estimated 30 billion barrels as of 2017, while a 2019 study for the Leibniz Information Sector for Economics estimated Turkmenistan to have the world's 5th largest natural gas reserves. Reincorporating these countries with the Russian energy sector would give it much greater leverage in the world's energy market, especially since the European Union has long sought greater economic ties with these Central Asian countries in a bid to reduce its dependence on Russian energy, even before the invasion of Ukraine. Controlling these oil and gas reserves would give Russia greater leverage over Europe, reducing the latter's potential energy alternatives. Russia's economy would have the opportunity to diversify away from the energy sector if it were to restore the Soviet Union. For example, we've mentioned that the post-Soviet countries in Central Asia host valuable minerals and rare earth elements. Moscow centralizing control of all those resources would make negotiating for them tougher on buyer countries. There are other resources too. Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan, for example, have abundant gold reserves, and Tajikistan also has the Koni Mansour silver deposit in its north, one of the most abundant reserves in the world. Despite these resources, the Central Asian region remains heavily dependent on its energy sector and has failed to diversify its economy, much like Russia. Reabsorption to Moscow's authority would by no means guarantee that this changes course. Militarily, a reconstruction of the Soviet Union would mean that Moscow gains control over all of the armed forces in the former post-Soviet states. Their resources would be added to those the Kremlin controls. Russia already has the world's 5th largest military by active personnel, with just over 1 million troops. Adding all of the post-Soviet states' capabilities to this strength would make the new Soviet Union the world's 2nd largest military, with over 1.5 million active personnel. In summation, a restoration of the Soviet Union would significantly increase Moscow's influence in the international system. It would become geographically, militarily, economically, and demographically stronger. However, there is no guarantee that these assets would be used to their fullest potential, much as they were not in the Soviet Union itself. As seen in the Soviet Union and in Russia's revanchist war in Ukraine now, and indeed the Russian Empire long before, mismanagement and corruption are common traits among various regimes in the Kremlin. In an interview for The New Yorker in March 2022, the Pulitzer Prize-nominated Stalin biographer Stephen Kotkin described Russia as historically being a relatively weak, great power, whose capabilities have never matched its aspirations. Although the West's foreign policy would need to change to meet the new challenge of a resurgent Russian power, in the long run there is little reason to believe that the historical pattern Kotkin pointed out would change. And it is for this reason that we have every reason to believe that a restoration of the Soviet Union any time in the near future is as fantastical as a restoration of the Roman Empire. But what do you think? What would a restoration of the Soviet Union do for Russia and its place in the international balance of power? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to hit the like button and be sure to subscribe to the channel for more military analysis from military experts.